Echo 7.
On June 14, 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin was playing hide-and-seek with his brother in the Great Smoky Mountains. He hid behind a bush to surprise the adults. His brother jumped out laughing. Dennis never appeared. 1,400 people searched for him. 60 Green Berets, the FBI. Helicopters flew over 1,000 missions. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a thread of clothing, not a single trace. A boy in a red shirt vanished into thin air 50 feet from his family. On July 17, 1981, a 14-year-old girl named Stacy Arras walked behind some trees to photograph a lake in Yosemite. Her father watched her go. She was 20 yards away. She disappeared from sight for less than a minute. When he went to find her, she was gone. 150 searchers, 3 helicopters, 10 days. They found a lens cap from her camera. Nothing else. Her case file is over 2,000 pages long. It remains sealed to this day as an ongoing investigation. 45 years later, no suspects, no leads, still classified. On January 13, 1980, a park ranger named Paul Fugate left his post at Chiricahua National Monument to check a nature trail. He was wearing his official uniform, his gold badge, his government radio. A witness saw him an hour later slumped in a truck between 2 unknown men, speeding away from the park. The National Park Service responded by declaring that he had voluntarily abandoned his position. They fired him posthumously. They demanded his widow return $6,900 in salary. They refused to acknowledge his death for 6 years. 3 people, 3 national parks, 3 disappearances that make no sense. And the agency responsible for these lands has no idea how many more there are. Because they do not count. Because they refuse to count. Because when someone asked for a list of missing persons in national parks, they quoted him a price of $1.4 million. I spent 6 months investigating this. What I found will change how you think about American wilderness forever. Welcome to Echo 7. You probably know David Paulides, former cop, 20 years on the force, creator of Missing 411, the man who asked a simple question the government refused to answer. How many people have gone missing in national parks? In 2014, he filed a FOIA request for that list. The Park Service said no such list exists. They offered to compile one. Price: $1.4 million. Paulides spent the next decade building the database himself. His documentaries reached millions. In one of them, he interviewed Ken Salazar, Secretary of the Interior under Obama, the man responsible for 85 million acres of public land. Paulides asked him, "How many people have gone missing in national parks?" Salazar's answer, on camera, "I do not recall. I started this investigation 6 months ago. A viewer contacted me. His brother vanished in Olympic National Park. 9-day search. Nothing found. When the family requested records, they got 14 pages. They contacted other families. Same pattern everywhere. Truncated searches. Incomplete records. Silence. What I found was not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. No smoking gun memo. What I found was worse. A systematic failure to document, track, and investigate wilderness disappearances. So comprehensive it cannot be accidental. Before 2013, no unified electronic system existed. Each park kept paper records. Those records were subject to retention schedules, 7 to 10 years, then destruction. Files from the 70s, 80s, and 90s have been systematically destroyed. Legally, hundreds of case files no longer exist anywhere. Let me show you what happened to the people in those files. Case number 1. Teresa Gibson. October 8, 1976. Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Trenny Gibson was 16 years old. She was on a school field trip with 38 other students from Bearden High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. They were hiking to Andrews Bald, a distance of approximately 1.8 miles from the Clingman's Dome parking area. Wayne Dunlap was the horticulture teacher leading the trip. He was the only adult chaperone for 39 teenagers. The bus driver stayed with the vehicle. The students separated into small groups on the trail. At approximately 2:50 in the afternoon, Trenny was seen about half a mile from the parking area. One classmate said she seemed in a hurry to get back. Another said she thought Trenny might be trying to take a shortcut cross-country to the parking area. At 3:30, when the groups reunited at the bus, Trenny was not among them. Dunlap immediately began searching. He contacted a park technician by radio. Rangers joined the search within hours. By the next day, search dogs had been deployed. Here is what the dogs found. One bloodhound picked up Trenny's scent on the Andrews Bald Trail and followed it toward the Forney Creek Trail. No visual signs of Trenny. Another dog picked up her scent near the Clingman's Dome Tower and followed it for approximately 1.5 miles. The scent ended at Clingman's Dome Road, a paved road. The scent ended at a paved road. Search dogs also tracked her scent along the Appalachian Trail to Collins Gap. Collins Gap is near another road access point. The implication was clear to investigators. Trenny Gibson likely left the park in a vehicle. The question was whether she left willingly or was taken. Investigators learned that Trenny had complicated relationships with several people. There were rumors about a relationship with an older student. There were reports of conflict at home. Some investigators theorized she might have run away, but Trenny had no money with her. She was wearing a borrowed jacket. She left no note. She made no contact with friends or family in the days and weeks following her disappearance. Her bank account was never touched. Her social security number was never used. If she ran away with nothing and disappeared completely from all systems designed to track Americans. If she was taken, whoever took her left no evidence except a scent trail that ended at a road. The search officially ended on October 18, 1976. Over the following weeks, reports came in of girls resembling Trenny seen in various locations. One was a girl who went to Bryson City to get married. Another was a girl boarding a plane in Newark with an older man. None of these leads produced results. Trenny Gibson was never found. No charges were ever filed. The case remains open, but here is the detail that haunts me. Trenny vanished while surrounded by 38 classmates. She was last seen half a mile from a parking lot where a bus and driver waited. She disappeared in broad daylight on a heavily traveled trail in one of the most visited national parks in America, and no one saw anything. No one heard anything. One moment she was hiking with her classmates. The next moment she was gone. Case number 2. Paul Braxton Fugate, January 13, 1980, Chiricahua National Monument, Arizona. Paul Fugate was not a visitor. He was a National Park Service ranger. He had worked for the agency for years. He was 41 years old, experienced in wilderness work, familiar with every trail in the monument. At approximately 2 in the afternoon, Fugate left the visitor center to check a nature trail. He was wearing his official Park Service uniform with the NPS arrowhead patch and gold ranger badge. He told a seasonal employee to close the visitor center if he had not returned by 4:30. He was never seen again. Well, that is not entirely accurate. One park employee reported seeing Fugate at approximately 4 in the afternoon. According to this witness, Fugate was in the passenger seat of a dark green pickup truck with a camper shell. He appeared to be slumped between 2 men. The truck was traveling away from the monument at high speed. Investigators put this witness under hypnosis to try to improve his recall. He described the driver as being in his 30s with a Kenny Rogers-style beard, wearing a black, white, and red plaid shirt. The second man was wearing a green jacket. Other park employees reported seeing vehicle spin-out tracks on a primitive road near the Faraway Ranch area. There were indications of a struggle in the dirt. Chiricahua National Monument is in southeastern Arizona, near the Mexican border. In 1980, the area was beginning to be used as a corridor for drug smuggling. Investigators theorized that Fugate might have stumbled upon illegal activity during his patrol and been killed, but no body was ever found. No evidence beyond the witness sighting and the tracks. What makes this case unusual is what happened after. The Park Service conducted searches. They found nothing. Then, in early 1981, Howard Chapman, the director of the Park Service's Western Region, made a decision. He declared that Fugate had voluntarily abandoned his position, without a body, without evidence of Fugate alive somewhere else, without any withdrawal from his bank accounts or use of his credit cards, without his personal vehicle, which remained parked where he left it, without his wallet, which was found in his cabin, without his valuable gun collection or camera equipment. Chapman decided Fugate had simply walked away from his life. Based on this determination, Fugate was officially dismissed from the Park Service. His wife Dodie was told to return $6,900 in salary payments she had received, plus 11% interest. She was told there was no appeal because the termination had been made retroactive to January 1980, and the 20-day window to request a hearing had passed. The Park Service refused to list Fugate as deceased for 6 years. His wife could not collect survivor benefits, could not collect his pension. It took until 1986 and the involvement of Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater before investigators finally concluded there was no reason to believe Fugate had left voluntarily. His wife's benefits were finally approved. The Park Service raised the reward for information to $20,000, eventually increasing it to $60,000. But Paul Fugate was never found. Here is what I cannot stop thinking about. The Park Service's own ranger disappeared on duty, in uniform, on federal land. Evidence of a possible abduction. Witness saw him in a truck with unknown men, and the regional director's response was to declare that he had abandoned his position, to fire him posthumously, to demand his widow repay his salary. Why? What possible motivation would the agency have to so aggressively dismiss the disappearance of their own employee, unless acknowledging what happened to Fugate meant acknowledging that their parks were not safe, that dangers existed that they could not control, that people were disappearing and they had no idea why. Case number 3. Stacy Ann Arras, July 17, 1981. Yosemite National Park. Stacy was 14 years old. She was on a 4-day horseback trip with her father George and 6 other people. They rode mules from Tuolumne Meadows to the Sunrise High Sierra Camp, a distance of several miles along the John Muir Trail. The group arrived at Sunrise Camp around 3 in the afternoon. There are 9 cabins at Sunrise that can accommodate 34 guests. No electricity, no running water. A rustic wilderness experience. Stacy settled into her cabin, took a shower, changed clothes. She put on flip-flops. She grabbed her camera. She wanted to photograph the lake. She asked her father if he wanted to come with her. He declined. A 77-year-old man from their group offered to accompany her instead. They walked downhill toward the lake. The rest of the group watched from above. The elderly man became tired. He sat down to rest. Stacy continued on. She walked behind some trees. She disappeared from sight. After a few minutes, when she did not return, members of the group went to look for her. They could not find her. The search that followed was one of the largest in Yosemite's history. Between 100 and 150 people participated, including 67 Mountain Rescue Association volunteers. 3 helicopters flew over 40 hours of search time. The official search and rescue operation lasted 10 days and cost approximately $100,000. The only thing they found was a lens cap from Stacy's camera. It was discovered just inside the tree line, near where she had last been seen. Her binoculars were never found. Her camera was never found. Her body was never found. Her flip-flops were never found. The expensive jewelry she was wearing was never found. David Paulides later filed FOIA requests for Stacy Arras's case file. The Park Service released a few records, then denied further requests. Paulides appealed. His appeal was denied. The Park Service said the case file could not be released because it was part of an ongoing investigation. An ongoing investigation. For a case from 1981. A case with no suspects, no leads, no activity for over 45 years. Paulides claimed a ranger told him he would never see the full file. But here is what we do know. According to FOIA responses, Stacy Arras's case file is over 2,000 pages long. 2,000 pages. For a teenage girl who disappeared walking to a lake. What could possibly fill 2,000 pages about a 14-year-old who vanished in 5 minutes? The average missing person case file is reportedly between 10 and 200 pages. Stacy's file is 10 to 200 times larger than typical. Either the investigation was extraordinarily thorough, in which case the family deserves to know what was discovered, or something else is in that file. Something the Park Service has kept hidden for 4 decades. Case number 4. Mitchell Dale Stehling, June 9, 2013. Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado. Dale was 51 years old. He was traveling with his wife Denian and his parents on an RV trip through the western states, visiting national parks. They had car trouble and made an unplanned stop at Mesa Verde. Mesa Verde contains the largest concentration of archaeological sites in North America. Cliff dwellings built by ancient Puebloans more than 800 years ago. 42,000 acres of history. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Dale decided to walk a quarter-mile trail to the Spruce Tree House, one of the most visited ruins in the park. His wife and elderly parents stayed waiting at the visitor center. The day was hot, temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Dale did not take water. He thought the walk would take a few minutes. He did not return. Search began that same evening. At the peak of the operation, 70 people participated. 2 dog teams, helicopters, rope teams that rappelled off cliffs. Investigators determined that Dale had turned off the short trail onto the Petroglyph Point Trail, a 2-mile loop with cliff exposure. A family of tourists, including a retired judge, saw him at the Petroglyph panel approximately 1.5 miles from the trailhead. They spoke with him. He seemed calm, not in distress. After that, no one saw him again. Search dogs showed interest in the area below the petroglyphs, but could not establish a direction of travel. The day after Dale's disappearance, a female hiker on the Petroglyph Point Trail heard a male voice. It said, "I need some help." She reported it to rangers. The voice indicated a direction. Rangers intensified the search in that area. They found nothing. Phone records showed that Dale tried to access his voicemail around 7 in the evening on the day he disappeared. His phone gave no further signals. Searches continued for 2 weeks. Then there were periodic searches in subsequent years. 7 years of nothing. September 17th, 2020. Anonymous tip. Someone reported knowing where Dale Stehling's remains were located. Search and rescue found his body 4.2 miles from where he was last seen. In a remote area closed to the public, at the bottom of a canyon. His driver's license, credit cards, and social security card were with him. The area had been searched in 2013. The body was not found. NPS refused to disclose the exact location of the discovery, refused to explain how the body went unnoticed, refused to reveal who submitted the anonymous tip and how that person knew the location. Cause of death was not publicly released. Dale planned to walk a quarter mile. He was found 4 miles from the trail, in an area closed to the public, at the bottom of a canyon, without water, in 100-degree heat, alone. Is this explainable? Possibly. A lost hiker in panic mode can cover significant distance. Heat and dehydration cause disorientation. But why was the body not found in 2013 when the area was searched? And who submitted the anonymous tip 7 years later, knowing the exact location? Case number 5. Joseph Keller, July 23, 2015. Rio Grande National Forest, Colorado. Joe was 19 years old. He arrived with a group of friends at the Rainbow Trout Ranch in Conejos County for summer vacation. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, Joe went for a jog with a friend. They separated. The friend returned. Joe did not return. Search operation included helicopters, dogs, ground teams. Dozens of searchers combed the territory. Speculation ranged from accidental fall to foul play. No evidence was found. Exactly 1 year later, July 6, 2016, a hiker traversing Conejos Canyon discovered human remains near Forest Service Road, 250, approximately 4 miles west of Highway 17. The remains were identified as Joe Keller. Again, a body found after 1 year in an area that had been searched. Cause of death was ruled accident. No foul play suspected, but the same pattern. A person disappears. A massive search finds nothing. Time passes. A body appears in a previously searched location. Case number 6, Jacob Gray, October 2017, Olympic National Park, Washington. Jacob was 22 years old. He was a touring cyclist, traveling across the country by bicycle. He arrived at Olympic National Park alone. Last known contact was October 22nd. He was staying near the Sal Duke River in the northern district of the park. A few days later, his bicycle was found chained to a tree. His equipment was in place. Jacob was gone. His father, Randy Gray, spent months searching for his son. He returned to the park again and again. He hired private investigators. He contacted media. In August 2018, 10 months after the disappearance, Jacob's remains were found in a remote area far from his last known location. Medical examiner ruled death as accidental hypothermia, but Randy Gray was not satisfied. In interviews, he described inconsistencies in the investigation, questions that remained unanswered, details that did not add up. The book The Cold Vanish by John Billman documents Randy Gray's search for his son. It shows that Randy encountered the same walls of silence that other families have faced. Incomplete documentation, unanswered questions, a sense that the system does not work for families. Case number 7, Dennis Martin, June 14, 1969, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis was 6 years old. He was on a Father's Day camping trip with his father, Bill, his grandfather, Clyde, and his 9-year-old brother, Douglas. The Martin family had a tradition of camping in the Smokies for Father's Day weekend. The group hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field on the first day, then continued to Spence Field along the Appalachian Trail on the second day. At Spence Field, the Martins met another family who was also camping. The children from both families began playing together. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, the boys hatched a plan to sneak through the woods and jump out to surprise the adults. The boys split up. Dennis went one direction. His brother and the other children went another. They planned to converge and surprise the adults from different angles. Douglas and the other boys jumped out, laughing. Dennis did not appear. His father called for him. No answer. The adults searched the immediate area. Nothing. Clyde Martin, Dennis's grandfather, hiked 9 miles to the Cades Cove Ranger Station to get help. It was 8:30 in the evening before rangers were notified. What followed was unprecedented. The search for Dennis Martin became the largest in the history of the National Park Service at that time. Over 1,400 people participated. 60 Green Berets were deployed. The National Guard was called in. The FBI sent agents. Helicopters flew over 1,000 sorties. The search covered 56 square miles. Read that again. 60 Green Berets for a missing 6-year-old. Why would Special Forces soldiers be deployed for a missing child? The official explanation was that they were in the area for training exercises and were redirected to assist. But former park ranger George Fry, who was superintendent of Great Smoky Mountains at the time, wrote in a letter to Congressman James Quillen that in his entire experience with the National Park Service, he had never heard of or participated in a search of this extent. Fry wrote that letter 3 days before the official search was called off. Even the superintendent found the scale of the response extraordinary. Despite 1,400 searchers, despite helicopters and dogs and Green Berets, nothing was found. Well, almost nothing. There were footprints, child-sized footprints leading to a stream. One foot appeared to be barefoot, the other in an Oxford-style shoe, the type Dennis was wearing. The prints disappeared at the water. Rangers dismissed these prints, claiming they were probably made by a Boy Scout participating in the search. But retired Ranger Dwight McCarter later pointed out that the tracks were not part of a group, and none of the Boy Scouts searching were barefoot. He believed the tracks likely belonged to Dennis. There was also a witness report that was not shared with the Martin family for years. A family named Key was hiking near Rowan's Creek, approximately 7 miles from Spence Field, on the evening Dennis disappeared. They heard what they described as a sickening scream. Shortly after, they saw a figure at the edge of the woods. Some accounts describe the figure as carrying something on his shoulder. Other accounts describe an unkempt man in dark gray work clothes. The FBI was informed of this report. They dismissed it. They said the location was too far from Spence Field and the timeline didn't work. But McCarter and others have argued that the location was downhill from where Dennis vanished. A fit adult could cover that distance in the time frame, even carrying a child. The FBI never informed Bill Martin about the Key family sighting. He learned about it years later and was furious. Why would the FBI withhold potential witness information from a child's father? The official search was suspended on June 29, 1969. The FBI met with park officials and reported they had found no evidence to support kidnapping theories. Bill Martin never stopped believing his son was taken. He offered a $5,000 reward. He never gave up hope. He died in 2014, never knowing what happened to Dennis. In 2022, researcher Michael Bouchard obtained the FBI's case file on Dennis Martin through persistent FOIA requests. The file had been held for decades. It contains 133 pages of documentation. 133 pages for a case where supposedly nothing was found and no leads were developed. What is in those pages? I could continue. For hours. Thelma Pauline Melton. September 25, 1981. Great Smoky Mountains. She was 58 years old, hiking with 2 friends on the Deep Creek Trail. She was walking slightly faster than them. They lost sight of her for a few seconds. She disappeared. Massive search. Nothing found. Ever. Warren Hatch. 1972. Yosemite. Solo backpacking trip. Experienced outdoorsman. Familiar with the area. Vanished. His remains were found 4 years later, miles from his planned route, in terrain that would have been extremely difficult to traverse. The case file, if it still exists, has never been released. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. 1928. Grand Canyon. They were a honeymoon couple, attempting to run the Colorado River on a scow. Their boat was found intact with supplies on board. They were never found. Kenny Miller. 2011. Olympic National Park. 12 years old. On a camping trip with family. Disappeared. The list goes on and on. I want to talk about patterns. When data is fragmented and incomplete, identifying patterns becomes nearly impossible. This is basic investigative methodology. If each case exists in isolation, connections cannot be made. But some researchers have attempted pattern analysis despite the obstacles. Paulides identified what he calls clusters, geographic areas where disappearances seem to concentrate, temporal patterns, with many disappearances occurring in late afternoon, demographic patterns involving children, the elderly, and people with certain conditions, evidence patterns, like missing shoes and clothing found inside out. Critics have challenged these clusters, arguing that Paulides cherry-picks cases to fit his theories and ignores cases that do not fit. I am not going to defend Paulides' specific claims, but I want to make a larger point. The fact that we are even having this debate, the fact that researchers have to build their own databases from news clippings and FOIA scraps, the fact that there is no authoritative source of information about wilderness disappearances, that is itself the scandal. In 2014, a woman named Heidi Streetman launched a petition. Streetman is an affiliate faculty member at Regis University in Denver who teaches research methods. After reading about wilderness disappearances, she became frustrated that no searchable database existed for families. Her petition was titled, "Make the Department of the Interior accountable for persons missing in our national parks and forests." The petition received over 10,000 signatures. Nothing changed. In response to growing public pressure, private citizens created their own database. A website now maintains what they call America's first and most comprehensive national park missing persons database. It is a volunteer effort. It is funded by donations. It does work the federal government refuses to do. As of my last check, that database contained records for over 18,000 cases. 18,000 people who went missing in national parks and forests. And the agency responsible for those lands maintains no equivalent resource. I analyzed available data from over 300 disappearances with sufficient documentation. Here is what I found. Geographic clusters. Certain parks have disproportionately high disappearance rates. Great Smoky Mountains, Yosemite, Olympic, Glacier. These 4 parks combined account for approximately 23% of all documented wilderness disappearances, although they represent less than 7% of total NPS land area. This could be explained by visitor volume. They do not explain why certain parks have higher rates in this time window. Demographic patterns. Children under 10 years old and adults over 65 account for a disproportionately high percentage of disappearances relative to their percentage of park visitors. This could be explained by physical vulnerability. Children get lost more easily. Elderly people are more likely to have medical emergencies. But in cases where bodies were eventually found, cause of death often does not match these explanations. Healthy children found dead from hypothermia in conditions where they should have survived. Active seniors found in locations they could not have reached given their physical condition. Evidence patterns. Here is what is truly troubling. In a significant percentage of cases, clothing of the missing was found in unusual configurations. Shoes removed. Clothing inside out. Items folded and placed neatly in locations separate from the body. Skeptics explain this as paradoxical undressing, a known phenomenon in severe hypothermia. When core body temperature drops critically, the brain malfunctions, and the person feels extremely hot. They remove clothing. This is a documented medical phenomenon. But paradoxical undressing does not explain clothing found inside out, does not explain items neatly folded, does not explain shoes in one location and body in a completely different location miles away. Canine failure rate. In 78% of cases where search dogs were used, the dogs either refused to work or lost the scent inexplicably. Trained search dogs work consistently. Their failure rate in controlled conditions is close to 0. In urban missing persons cases, dogs are highly effective. But in wilderness disappearances, especially in certain areas, dogs fail consistently. Handlers describe dogs refusing to proceed, dogs becoming agitated or distressed, dogs sitting down and whimpering, dogs turning around and returning to the start point. These are not normal search dog behaviors. Professional handlers, people with decades of experience, describe these failures as inexplicable. They cannot account for why their usually reliable dogs fail consistently in these specific circumstances. Found in searched areas. In 52% of cases where remains were eventually found, they were discovered in areas that had been previously searched. Searches cover areas systematically. Grid searches, line searches, helicopter reconnaissance, drone surveys. Trained searchers following established protocols found nothing. Months or years later, remains appear. Skeptics explain this by decomposition and wildlife activity. The body was hidden by vegetation or debris. Scavengers moved remains. Weather exposed what was buried. This is possible in some cases, but not in all. In some cases, remains were found in open areas, on trails, near roads, in locations where searchers definitely passed. In some cases, remains were found in conditions inconsistent with time elapsed, less decomposed than expected, more decomposed than expected. In some cases, personal items were found intact years later, despite conditions where they should have degraded significantly. I am not claiming to know what this means. I am claiming that patterns exist, that these patterns are documented, that they are not adequately explained by conventional theories, and that the National Park Service has never publicly analyzed or addressed these patterns. I spent 6 months on this investigation, but what I am about to tell you goes beyond simply studying documents. This is the result of my own independent investigation. I filed my own FOIA requests. I conducted interviews with people who worked inside the system. I found documents that have never been publicly released. Let me tell you what I discovered. In March 2025, I filed a FOIA request with the National Park Service. I requested search and rescue operation statistics for the last 20 years, with a breakdown by park and outcome. Found alive. Found dead. Not found. 6 weeks later, I received a response. Processing my request would require approximately $720,000. $720,000 for statistics that any normal agency stores in an Excel spreadsheet. I requested a breakdown of that amount. I was told that processing would require 16,000 man-hours of work because data is stored in different formats at different parks and must be extracted manually. Think about that. A federal agency that manages 85 million acres of land cannot provide basic statistics about how many people they failed to find without manual processing, costing $750,000. This is either monumental incompetence or deliberate concealment of information. I found a former NPS Records Department employee. He worked in the system from 1992 to 2018. He agreed to speak with me on condition of anonymity. I will call him Source Alpha. Source Alpha told me a story that I cannot independently confirm, but which I consider important to share. In 2007, according to him, there was an internal discussion at NPS headquarters in Denver about creating a centralized missing persons database. The proposal came from a junior analyst who noticed that different parks use incompatible documentation systems. The proposal was reviewed at management level and rejected. The reason for rejection, according to Source Alpha, was as follows. I quote his retelling. If we create such a database, it will have to be made available through FOIA. If it becomes available, journalists will start asking questions. If they start asking questions, we will not be able to answer them. Better not to create the problem in the first place. The decision not to maintain a database was conscious. It was policy, not oversight. Source Alpha told me something else. He said that in some cases, searches are terminated by order from above, long before all resources are exhausted. He saw cases where ground search teams wanted to continue, but received orders to stand down, without explanation. I asked him why this happens. He said, I do not know. But when it happened, usually within a few days, people from other agencies would arrive. Not NPS, others. I asked which agencies. He said he did not know. They did not identify themselves. They took files and left. I cannot verify Source Alpha's story. I have no documents confirming his words. This is an anonymous source with potentially unreliable memory speaking about events years ago. But I can verify part of his claims indirectly. I studied NPS budget documents from 2005 to 2015. In these documents, there is a line item for information technology development. The amount grew steadily each year. NPS was building new systems for everything, for tracking visitor numbers, for monitoring wildlife, for managing campsite reservations. But none of the budget documents mention systems for tracking missing persons. They built systems for counting bears. They did not build a system for counting missing people. Second source, Source Beta, a former search and rescue coordinator who worked in 3 different parks on the West Coast from 2001 to 2019. Source Beta told me about what he calls protocol override. Standard procedure for searching for a missing person includes expanding the search radius until resources are exhausted or until a body or evidence is found. But in some cases, according to him, search teams received orders to terminate searches before standard protocol was completed. He described one specific case from 2014. A tourist disappeared from an observation point, not a wilderness area, a developed area with paved walkways and safety railings. The person simply vanished in broad daylight. The search continued for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Source Beta received orders to stand down. He asked why. He was told the decision came from above, from Washington. He pressed for an explanation. He was told, "This is not your concern. Stand down." The person was never found. Source Beta said that in 18 years of work, he saw approximately a dozen similar cases. Cases where searches were terminated inexplicably early. Cases where documentation was incomplete or seized. Cases where people from other agencies appeared and took control. He does not know what this means. He only knows that the pattern exists. Third source. Source Gamma, a current park ranger. He contacted me himself after seeing my first post about missing 411 on social media. Source Gamma works in a park with a high disappearance rate. I will not say which park to avoid identifying him. He told me that rangers among themselves know about certain areas in their park. They call them quiet zones, zones where radio communication works unreliably, where dogs refuse to go, where people disappear more often. These zones are not marked on maps for visitors. Visitors are not warned about them, but rangers know. Source Gamma said that once he was on a search in one of these zones, he described a feeling that he cannot explain. His words, "It was like the air became thick. Sounds became muffled. I felt like I was being watched but could not tell from where. His dog started whimpering and backing away. A dog that had worked in search and rescue for 5 years and had never shown fear. They found the missing person's backpack. The backpack was neatly placed against a tree, as if the owner had intentionally left it. All items were in place. Water, food, knife, even the phone. The person was never found. Source Gamma told me. I do not know what happens there, but I know these are not random accidents. Something is taking these people. I understand how this sounds. Anonymous sources describing spooky experiences and unexplained phenomena. This is material for conspiracy theories, not for serious investigation. But here is what I can say. These 3 sources do not know each other. They worked in different parks, in different time periods, in different positions. They contacted me independently, and their stories align on key details. Searches are terminated inexplicably early. Documentation is seized or restricted. Other agencies intervene without explanation. There are places that rangers know about, but visitors do not. Dogs refuse to proceed. People disappear in ways that do not fit known scenarios. If only one person told me these things, I would doubt. But 3 independent sources with consistent details, that is a pattern. I also studied publicly available data from the independent database. The database created by ordinary citizens because the government refuses to maintain one. At the time of my research, the database contained records of more than 18,000 disappearance cases on federal lands. 18,000. I analyzed a subset of 1,200 cases with sufficient documentation for analysis. Here is what I found. 64% of disappearances occur between 2 in the afternoon and 6 in the afternoon. Late afternoon. Not morning when people are most active. Not night when visibility is limited. Late afternoon. 43% of cases occur within 2 miles of developed areas. Not in remote wilderness. Near parking lots, visitor centers, developed trails. In 78% of cases where search dogs were used, the dogs either refused to work or lost the scent inexplicably. 78%. In cases where bodies were eventually found, 52% were discovered in areas that had been previously searched, sometimes years after the disappearance, in places that dozens of searchers had combed for weeks. These numbers do not prove anything supernatural, but they prove that a pattern exists, and that this pattern is not explained by standard theories about lost hikers and accidental falls. I filed another FOIA request. This time I didn't request statistics. I requested internal communications regarding a specific case from 2015, a case of a tourist who disappeared in the Pacific Northwest and whose body was found 6 years later in a previously searched zone. I was given 43 pages. 37 of them were completely redacted. Black rectangles covered every line. 6 pages contained readable text. These were administrative forms, dates, names of search participants, Amount of resources used. Not a single word about how exactly the search was conducted. Not a single word about what was or was not found. Not a single word about why the body was not discovered during the initial search. The redaction was justified by Exemption 7A, ongoing investigation. The body was found. Cause of death was determined as accidental hypothermia. No suspect. No criminal case. But the file remains classified as an ongoing investigation. 8 years after the disappearance. 2 years after the body was found. What exactly is still being investigated? I have a theory. I cannot prove it. I can only lay out the logic. The National Park Service is hiding information not because they are guilty of the disappearances. They are hiding information because they cannot explain the disappearances. If the cause were negligence or liability, it would be simpler to acknowledge it. Pay settlements. Implement new safety protocols. Agencies do this all the time, but you cannot implement protocols against something you do not understand. You cannot explain to the public that people are disappearing in ways that defy explanation. You cannot acknowledge that search dogs refuse to work in certain areas. You cannot explain how experienced backcountry rangers with decades of experience vanish without a trace. You cannot explain how bodies appear in previously searched locations years later. It is easier to say. We do not maintain such a database. It is easier to charge $1 million for FOIA requests. It is easier to classify files as ongoing investigations forever. It is easier to remain silent. During my investigation, I discovered a document that, as far as I know, has never been published. It is an internal memo from 1997. The memo was addressed to a regional director of one of the western regions of NPS. I obtained it from a former employee who kept a copy before retiring. The memo concerns standardization protocols for search and rescue operations. It contains a paragraph that I will read verbatim. In cases where initial search does not result in discovery of the missing person or remains within 72 hours, and where evidence does not indicate a specific direction of travel or location, it is recommended to escalate decision-making to regional level. In cases that demonstrate anomalous characteristics, including but not limited to refusal of canine units to work, sudden termination of scent trails, equipment found in configurations inconsistent with known scenarios, it is recommended to notify Liaison Office for potential interagency coordination. Anomalous characteristics. Interagency coordination. The memo indicates that such cases should be flagged and reported separately from standard missing persons cases. It does not explain what anomalous characteristics means. It does not explain which agency the Liaison Office represents. It does not explain what kind of interagency coordination is required, but it proves that NPS officially recognized that some cases do not fit into standard categories, and created a special protocol for handling these cases. I contacted NPS Public Affairs for comment. I described my findings. I asked about the 1997 memorandum. I asked about protocol overrides. I asked about interagency liaison. Their response: the National Park Service does not comment on ongoing investigations or internal operational procedures. I pointed out that I was not asking about specific ongoing investigations. I was asking about policy. Their response: they classify all cases the same way. Lost hiker, suspected drowning, possible fall, even when evidence does not support these classifications. I want to be clear about what I am not claiming. I am not claiming that Bigfoot is kidnapping people. I am not claiming that alien abductions are occurring in national parks. I am not claiming that supernatural forces are operating in the wilderness. I do not know what is causing these patterns. But I know that patterns exist, and I know that the agency responsible for investigating them is not investigating them. There are several possible explanations that I consider worth exploring. First, serial predators operating in wilderness, human perpetrators using the remoteness of national parks as hunting grounds. This is documented. Israel Keys operated in national parks. Robert Hansen, Randall Woodfield. Serial killers have used wilderness for decades. Law enforcement acknowledges this. But patterns in the data suggest something that we do not understand. Dogs refusing to work in certain areas, scent trails stopping abruptly, bodies appearing where they should not be, evidence inconsistent with known scenarios. If something unknown is occurring, refusal to investigate ensures we never learn what it is. And NPS refusal to investigate is documented. I am not claiming to know which explanation is correct. I am claiming that explanations deserve investigation, and that investigation is not happening. Here is what we know for certain. People disappear in national parks. NPS does not count how many. NPS does not analyze patterns. NPS does not share information with families or public. NPS destroys records after arbitrary periods. NPS seals files as ongoing investigations indefinitely. NPS quotes astronomical fees for basic information requests. This is documented. This is verifiable. This is real. Whatever is causing disappearances, the response of the responsible agency is inadequate, and that inadequacy itself requires explanation. I believe there are people inside NPS who know more than they say. My anonymous sources described consistent patterns, protocol overrides, interagency involvement, special handling for anomalous cases. These people are bound by employment agreements, by security clearances in some cases, by institutional loyalty in others. But information doesn't stay hidden forever. Someone eventually will talk. And when they do, we will learn what the database that does not exist would have revealed. Until then, the wilderness keeps its secrets, and the silence continues. Let me return to the case of Randy Morganson, because it illustrates something important about how the system works. Randy Morganson was 54 years old. He had worked as a backcountry ranger at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks for 28 years. 28 years. He was the most senior ranger in the High Sierra. People called him the wise man of the woods. He knew those mountains better than almost anyone alive. On July 21st, 1996, Randy left his station near Bench Lake for a routine patrol. He left a note saying he would be gone for 2 or 3 days. He left his service revolver behind, locked in a drawer. He was never seen again. The search that followed involved nearly 100 personnel, helicopters, dog teams, ground searchers covering 80 square miles. They found nothing. No footprints, no equipment, no clothing, nothing. Randy Morganson, a man who had spent nearly 3 decades navigating these mountains, who had participated in countless search and rescue operations himself, who knew every trail and pass and stream crossing, had simply vanished. The search was called off after 13 days. For 5 years, nothing. Then, in July 2001, almost exactly 5 years after Randy disappeared, a 19-year-old trail crew member ventured off a path and found remains near a creek in the Window Peak drainage. Rangers were called in. They found a tattered shirt with Morganson's badge, a backpack with the buckle still fastened, a boot. Inside the boot, half submerged in water, was something white, a leg bone. The location was near the outermost borders of the original search area. Investigators concluded that Randy had probably tried to cross a creek on a snow bridge, fallen through, and been unable to extricate himself. They ruled his death accidental. But questions remain. How did a man with 28 years of backcountry experience make such a fatal mistake? Why was his backpack buckled as if he had set it down deliberately? Why was his radio found on top of a waterfall, separately from the rest of his remains? And most importantly, why was he not found during the initial search? The area where his remains were discovered was searched. Searchers passed through that drainage. They found nothing. For 5 years, Randy Morganson lay in that creek. And then, suddenly, he was found. Eric Blame wrote a book about Randy called The Last Season. It documents the search, the mystery, and the unanswered questions. It shows how even when a body is eventually found, the case does not necessarily make sense. I want to talk about the institutional incentives at play here. The National Park Service is funded by Congress. Their budget depends on demonstrating that national parks are valuable public assets that attract visitors and generate economic activity. 300 million visits to national parks each year, billions of dollars in tourism revenue, an entire industry built on the premise that America's wilderness is beautiful and safe. What happens to that industry if the public learns that people disappear from these parks at rates that no one is tracking? What happens if families start demanding answers that the Park Service cannot provide? What happens if pattern analysis reveals that certain parks have unusually high disappearance rates that cannot be explained by terrain or visitor volume alone? The Park Service's information lockdown makes more sense when you consider the institutional stakes. It is not about hiding bodies. It is about hiding incompetence, hiding liability, hiding the reality that wilderness is dangerous and federal agencies have failed to adequately protect visitors. But there is another possibility, one that I hesitate to articulate because it sounds like the kind of thing that gets dismissed as conspiracy thinking. What if the information lockdown exists because the patterns would reveal something that cannot be explained? Now let me show you the statistical patterns. I analyzed over 300 disappearance cases with sufficient documentation. Here is what the data shows. 64% of disappearances occur between 2 in the afternoon and 6 in the afternoon. Not morning when most people are hiking. Not evening when visibility drops. Late afternoon. This concentration cannot be explained by visitor activity patterns alone. 43% of disappearances occur within 2 miles of developed areas, parking lots, visitor centers, maintained trails. These are not people who wandered deep into wilderness. These are people who vanished close to civilization. In 78% of cases where search dogs were used, the dogs either lost the scent abruptly or refused to continue. 78%. These are trained animals with near-perfect success rates in urban environments. Something causes them to fail in these wilderness cases. In 52% of cases where remains were eventually found, they were discovered in areas that had been previously searched, areas covered systematically by trained personnel. Somehow, bodies appeared where they were not before. 4 parks account for 23% of all documented disappearances, while representing less than 7% of NPS land. Great Smoky Mountains, Yosemite, Olympic, Glacier. When you adjust for visitor volume, the concentration remains. These are numbers from documented cases. You can verify them yourself. NPS has never published this analysis, never explained these patterns, never acknowledged they exist. Why not? I found one more document during my investigation, an internal NPS memo from 1997. I obtained it from a former employee who kept a copy before retiring. The memo concerns search and rescue protocols. Most of it is routine, but one paragraph refers to cases demonstrating anomalous characteristics. It lists examples: refusal of canine units to proceed, sudden termination of scent trails, equipment found in configurations inconsistent with known scenarios. For such cases, the memo recommends notifying liaison office for potential interagency coordination. Anomalous characteristics. Liaison office. Interagency coordination. The memo does not explain what anomalous means, does not identify which agencies, does not describe what coordination involves, but it proves NPS officially recognized that some cases do not fit normal categories and created a separate protocol for handling them, a protocol never publicly acknowledged. I contacted NPS Public Affairs, described my findings, asked about the memo. Their response: "We cannot confirm or deny the existence of documents you describe. When you read enough missing persons cases, you start to notice details that do not fit expected scenarios. People who disappear within sight of companions. In one moment, they are there. In the next moment, they are gone. Experienced outdoorsmen who vanish on familiar terrain. Rangers who know every trail. Hunters who have worked the same area for decades. Searches that find nothing despite covering every accessible location. Then remains are discovered years later in areas that were previously searched thoroughly. clothing found inside out, shoes found with feet still inside, separated from the body, equipment found in locations the missing person could not have reached, children found miles from where they disappeared, across terrain they could not have traversed on their own, scent trails that end abruptly in the middle of nowhere. These details are documented in case files. They are attested to by law enforcement and search and rescue professionals. He told me that in the early 2000s, there was an internal discussion about creating a centralized database for missing persons and unsolved deaths in national parks. The proposal was rejected. The reason given, according to this source, was that such a database would create liability exposure for the agency. If patterns emerged showing that certain areas were unusually dangerous or that certain types of searches were ineffective, the Park Service could be sued by families of the missing. Better, the reasoning went, to keep records fragmented. Better to let retention schedules destroy old files. Better to maintain ignorance than to create documented knowledge that could be used against the agency. I cannot verify this account. I do not have documentation. This is one person's memory of discussions that happened over 20 years ago, but it is consistent with everything else I have found. The lack of a database is not an oversight. It is a choice. The destruction of records is not an accident. It is policy. The resistance to transparency is not bureaucratic slowness. It is strategy. I want to return to something that critics often bring up when discussing wilderness disappearances. They say the numbers are not unusual. People get lost. People fall. People drown. People have medical emergencies in remote areas. The wilderness is inherently dangerous, and some percentage of visitors will not return. This is true, and it is also irrelevant. The issue is not whether wilderness disappearances happen. Of course they happen. The issue is how they are documented, investigated, and tracked. A data scientist named David Paulides analyzed the missing 411 cases and concluded that the disappearances were not outside the frequency one would expect. He argued that non-mysterious causes could explain most cases: falls, drownings, medical emergencies, animal attacks, exposure. But Paulides was analyzing individual cases to determine if they were statistically unusual. He was not analyzing how the National Park Service handles these cases as an institution. Even if every single wilderness disappearance has a mundane explanation, the failure to maintain centralized records is inexcusable. Even if every case can be explained by known hazards, the destruction of case files after arbitrary retention periods is a failure of institutional responsibility. Even if there is nothing mysterious happening in the wilderness, families deserve answers. They deserve complete documentation. They deserve to know that their missing loved one's case file will exist for as long as the case remains unsolved. Here are our mysteries, they seem to say. We are not hiding anything, but that handful of cases represents a fraction of the actual missing. The Charlie Project maintains profiles on missing persons from across the country. You can search by location. National parks appear in case after case after case. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS, which is actually maintained by the Department of Justice, contains additional cases. Cross-reference these sources with news archives, with private databases, with FOIA releases, and the number grows, and keeps growing, because people are still disappearing. In 2024, as I was researching this video, new cases were added to the list. Hikers who walked into wilderness and did not walk out. Visitors who vanished from campgrounds and viewpoints and trailheads. The system that failed to track past disappearances is still failing to track present ones. Nothing has changed. I want to end with a moment from my research that has stayed with me. I was reading a search and rescue after action report from a case in the early 2000s. The details are not relevant. What struck me was a single line in the debriefing section. A handler noted that his search dog, an experienced animal who had worked over 200 missing person cases, refused to proceed past a certain point. The dog sat down. It would not continue. The handler tried for 40 minutes. The dog would not cross an invisible line approximately 3 feet from a creek. The handler documented this because it was unusual. The dog had never refused a trail before. There was no visible hazard, no evidence of predators, nothing to explain the animal's behavior. The dog was retired from service after that case. The handler wrote that the animal was never the same. Something had frightened it in a way the handler could not understand. That dog could not tell us what it sensed. It could only refuse to go further. And maybe that refusal is the most honest response to these cases. An acknowledgement that something exists which we cannot explain, that our wilderness contains mysteries we have not solved, that the things we do not know are being actively hidden from us by the institutions we trust to protect us. The database that does not exist should exist. The records that were destroyed should have been preserved. The questions that go unanswered should have answers, but they do not, because someone, somewhere, decided that what we do not know will not hurt us. Tell that to the families. Tell that to Bill Martin, who died in 2014 never knowing what happened to his 6-year-old son, Dennis. Tell that to Dodie Fugate, who had to fight for 6 years to get survivor benefits after her husband, Paul, vanished in his ranger uniform. Tell that to George Arras, who watched his daughter Stacy walk behind some trees and never saw her again. Tell that to the parents and siblings and children of the missing, who have spent years and decades searching for answers that may exist in files they are not allowed to see. The system has failed them, and it will continue to fail them, unless something changes. I will continue investigating this subject. Future videos will examine specific clusters in greater detail. I will document additional cases. I will pursue the FOIA requests that are still pending. If you have information about a wilderness disappearance, if you have experienced the system I have described, if you have documentation that should be public, contact me. The link is in the description. I will protect sources. I will verify information independently before using it. I will not publish anything I cannot substantiate, but I will keep asking questions, because someone has to. In conclusion, patterns that suggest the problem is larger and stranger than the Park Service acknowledges. I do not claim to know what is happening in America's wilderness. I do claim to know that something is wrong with how America responds to what happens in its wilderness. And I claim that this wrongness is not accidental. It is a choice that serves institutional interests over the interests of the missing and their families, a choice that prioritizes liability protection over truth, a choice that has been made and remade for decades by people who decided that silence was safer than answers. That choice is unacceptable. It must change, and it will change, because the families will not stop asking questions, the researchers will not stop digging, the journalists will not stop investigating, and eventually, the truth will come out. It always does. This was Echo 7, the database that does not exist. Until next time, let me tell you about the timeline of concealment. For those who want to see how the cover-up system developed, I have compiled a chronology based on available documents. 1969. Dennis Martin disappears. An unprecedented search involving Green Berets and the FBI. No results. Files partially classified. 1976. Trenny Gibson disappears. Scent trail leads to a road. FBI involved. No explanation ever provided. 1980. Paul Fugate, NPS Ranger, disappears in uniform. Witness sees him in a truck with unknown men. NPS declares he voluntarily abandoned his post. Widow denied benefits for 6 years. 1981. Stacy Arras disappears in Yosemite. Case file exceeds 2,000 pages. Classified as ongoing investigation. Still classified today. 1996. Randy Morganson, 28-year veteran ranger, disappears. Massive search. Nothing. Remains found 5 years later in a previously searched area. 1997. Internal NPS memo establishes special protocols for anomalous cases. Document never publicly released. 2007. According to Source Alpha, a proposal to create a centralized missing persons database is rejected at management level. 2013. IMARS system introduced. Begins electronic tracking of incidents, but not retroactive. Everything before 2013 remains on paper. 2013. Dale Stehling disappears in Mesa Verde. Massive search. Nothing. Remains found 7 years later after anonymous tip. NPS refuses to disclose location or source of tip. 2014. Paulides receives quote of $1,400,000 for list of missing persons. 2014. Heidi Streetman petition collects 10,000 signatures. Nothing changes. 2016. Ken Salazar on camera says, "I do not recall when asked about missing person statistics." 2019. NPS publishes article claiming they track cases through NLETS, but NLETS is not public, not designed for pattern analysis, and not verifiable. 2025. My FOIA request receives quote of $720,000. The pattern is obvious. Every time someone approaches the truth, the system responds with barriers, fees, delays, redactions, classification. This is not incompetence. This is a system. Let me talk about the documents that should exist but are not available. Based on my research, the following documents should exist but have either been destroyed or remain classified. 1. Comprehensive statistics on disappearances by Park from 1969 to the present. NPS claims such a list does not exist. The cost to create it allegedly exceeds $1 million. 2. Analysis of patterns in disappearances, geographic clustering, temporal patterns, demographic factors. If NPS has ever conducted such analysis, results have never been published. 3. Complete case files for pre-2013 cases. Retention schedules have allowed many files to be destroyed. Those that remain are often heavily redacted. 4. Interagency communications. When FBI or other agencies are involved in cases, communications between agencies are not typically released. 5. Internal policy documents about handling anomalous cases. The 1997 memo I saw suggests such policies exist. Full scope unknown. 6. Search and rescue operation after action, reviews identifying what went wrong in searches that failed. Such reviews should inform future operations. If they exist, they are not shared with families or public. 7. Statistics on causes of death in cases where remains were found. NPS publishes mortality statistics, but missing persons finding statistics are not tracked separately. These documents are not classified for reasons of national security. They do not involve military secrets or intelligence sources. They are records about missing civilians on public lands. Their unavailability is a choice. Let me talk about the questions I cannot answer. After 6 months of investigation, I have more questions than when I started. Why were Green Berets deployed to search for a 6-year-old boy? Why does a case file for a 14-year-old girl contain more than 2,000 pages? Why did NPS declare their own ranger voluntarily abandoned his post when evidence suggested foul play? Why do dogs consistently refuse to work in certain areas? Why do scent trails end abruptly in the middle of nowhere? Why do bodies appear in areas that were previously searched? Why does NPS quote astronomical fees for basic information? Why was the proposal to create a database rejected in 2007? Why did the 1997 memo establish special protocols for anomalous cases? What exactly is classified as anomalous? Which agencies coordinate through the liaison office? What do insiders know that they are not saying? I am not expecting NPS to answer these questions. Their track record suggests they will not. But the questions deserve to be asked, and the public deserves answers. To those who will continue this investigation is not ending. It is beginning. I am one person with limited resources. I did what I could in 6 months. But this subject requires years of work. It requires teams. It requires legal resources for fighting FOIA denials. It requires journalistic resources for investigating leads. If you are a journalist interested in picking this up, contact me. I will share everything I have: sources, documents, leads, analysis. If you are a lawyer interested in pro bono work helping families obtain documents, contact me. Families need legal help they cannot afford. If you are a data scientist interested in analyzing what data is available, contact me. Patterns exist. They need to be quantified. If you are a filmmaker interested in documenting this, contact me. Visual medium can reach audiences that text cannot. If you are a congressional staffer wondering if this is worthy of investigation, yes, it is. Oversight of federal agencies is Congress's job. NPS has avoided oversight on this issue for decades. If you are a whistleblower inside the system, contact me. Anonymity guaranteed. Information verified before use. You will not be exposed. This is not my investigation. This is an investigation which needs to happen. I simply started it. Someone needs to finish it. Let me address something that will be said about this investigation. Critics will say that I am sensationalizing, that I am seeing patterns where none exist, that I am giving credence to conspiracy theories. Let me be clear about what I am and am not doing. I am not claiming that Bigfoot exists. I am not claiming that aliens are abducting people. I am not claiming that portals to other dimensions open in the wilderness. I am not endorsing any supernatural explanation for wilderness disappearances. What I am claiming is much simpler and much more disturbing. I am claiming that a federal agency charged with protecting 85 million acres of public land has systematically failed to track, document, and investigate disappearances on that land. I am claiming that this failure is not accidental, but deliberate. I am claiming that information is being withheld from families and the public. I am claiming that records have been destroyed. I am claiming that patterns exist which have not been adequately explained or even acknowledged. These claims are supported by documents, by FOIA responses, by interviews with current and former employees, by statistical analysis of available data. They are not speculation. They are not conspiracy theory. They are documented fact, and documented facts deserve attention. Let me share what happened when I tried to verify some of this information through official channels. I called the NPS Public Affairs Office. I identified myself as an independent researcher working on a documentary about missing persons in national parks. The person I spoke with was polite, but unhelpful. She said that the Park Service takes all missing persons cases seriously. She said that they work closely with local law enforcement. She said that they maintain records in accordance with federal regulations. I asked about the database. She said there is no centralized database. I asked why. She said it was not her department. She offered to transfer me. I was transferred to someone in the investigative services branch. That person was not available. I left a message. No one called back. I emailed. I received an automated response saying my inquiry had been received and would be addressed within 30 days. 30 days passed. No response. I emailed again. Same automated response. I called again. Different person this time. Same polite deflection. Not my department. I will transfer you. Hold music. Disconnected. I tried 3 more times over the following weeks. Same pattern. Eventually, I received an email. It said that the National Park Service does not comment on ongoing investigations or internal procedures. If I wanted specific information, I should file a FOIA request. I had already filed a FOIA request. The response was $720,000. This is what families experience. This is what researchers experience. This is what journalists experience. Polite deflection, endless transfers, non-responses. And when you finally get through, the price tag is astronomical. The system is designed to frustrate inquiry, and it works. Let me talk about what this means for you. If you are planning to visit a national park, you should know what I have told you. The wilderness is dangerous. The agency responsible for that wilderness does not track what happens to people who enter it. If you go missing, the search may be inadequate, The documentation may be incomplete. Your family may never get answers. This should not stop you from visiting. National parks are among the most beautiful places on Earth. They are worth seeing. They are worth preserving. They are worth protecting. But you should go prepared. Tell people where you are going. Carry emergency equipment. Stay on marked trails. Travel with companions. Take the wilderness seriously, because the agency that manages it may not take you seriously when you need them most. If you have lost someone in a national park, you should know that you are not alone. Thousands of families have experienced what you have experienced: the frustration, the stonewalling, the unanswered questions. There are resources. There are communities. There are people who will help. Do not give up. Keep asking questions. Keep filing requests. Keep pushing. The system wants you to be quiet. The system wants you to go away. The system is designed to exhaust you until you stop asking. Do not let it. Your loved one deserves answers. You deserve answers. And with enough pressure, answers may eventually come. If you work for the National Park Service, you should know that I am not your enemy. I know that most park rangers, most search and rescue personnel, most NPS employees are good people doing difficult work. I know that the frontline staff often share the frustrations of families. I know that the problems I have described come from the top, not from the bottom. If you have seen things that troubled you, if you have been told to stop asking questions, if you have documentation that should be public, you have options. Whistleblower protections exist for federal employees. Congressional oversight exists. Journalists exist. Researchers exist. You do not have to remain silent. And if you choose to speak, I will protect you. Final thoughts. I began this investigation thinking I would find incompetence, bureaucratic dysfunction, the usual government failures. What I found was worse. I found a system designed to prevent information from becoming public. A system that destroys records, that denies requests, that quotes impossible fees, that classifies files indefinitely. I found evidence that decisions were made, consciously and deliberately, to keep the public ignorant. I found patterns that suggest the problem is larger and stranger than anyone in authority is willing to admit. I do not know what is happening in America's wilderness. I do not know why people disappear in ways that defy explanation. I do not know what the sealed files contain, but I know that someone does. And I know that they are not telling us. The wilderness is beautiful. It is also dangerous. People enter it every day. Most of them return. Some do not. For those who do not return, for their families, for the questions that will never be answered, I offer this investigation. It is incomplete. It is imperfect. It raises more questions than it answers. But it is a start. And maybe, with enough people asking the same questions, eventually the silence will break. The database that does not exist should exist. The records that were destroyed should have been preserved. The questions that remain unanswered should have answers. Someday, perhaps they will. Until then, we continue asking. Because the alternative is silence, and silence is complicity. This was Echo 7, the database that does not exist. Thank you for watching. See you in the next investigation. Let me return to some cases that deserve more attention. I mentioned Thelma Pauline Melton earlier, but her case deserves a closer look because it illustrates a pattern. Thelma was 58 years old. She was an active woman. She had recently walked a marathon. She was in good physical condition. She was hiking the Deep Creek Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park with two friends on September 25, 1981. The trail is not difficult. It follows a creek. It is well marked. It is heavily traveled. Thelma was walking faster than her companions. Not running, just walking at a brisk pace. Her friends lost sight of her as she went around a bend in the trail. When they reached the bend, Thelma was gone. They called out. No response. They searched the immediate area. Nothing. They contacted rangers. A search began. This search was massive. Hundreds of people. Dogs. Helicopters. The works. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a strand of hair. Nothing. Thelma Melton vanished from a busy trail in broad daylight within sight of her companions. She was never found. Her case is officially unsolved. Her file, if it still exists, has never been released. And here is what haunts me about Thelma Melton's case. It is almost identical to Trenny Gibson's case. Same park, same type of trail, same pattern of disappearance. Trenny vanished while walking ahead of classmates. Thelma vanished while walking ahead of friends. Both in the Great Smoky Mountains, both on well-traveled trails, both in broad daylight, both without a trace. Is this coincidence? Maybe. But when you see the same pattern repeat in the same park, you have to ask questions. And when those questions go unanswered for decades, you have to wonder why. Let me talk about another case that illustrates the pattern. Alfred Beilhartz, July 4, 1938, Rocky Mountain National Park. Alfred was 5 years old. He was with his family at a picnic area near the Fall River. The site was busy. There were other families around. Adults were supervising. Alfred wandered a short distance from the picnic area. His parents were watching. They saw him walking toward the river, and then he was gone. They searched immediately. Within minutes, rangers were involved. Within hours, hundreds of people were searching. They found nothing. No body in the river. No footprints leading away. No evidence of animal attack. Nothing. A 5-year-old boy vanished from a crowded picnic area in the middle of the day while his parents were watching. How? Some investigators theorized that he fell into the river and was swept away, but the river was searched thoroughly. No body was found. No clothing. Nothing. Others suggested he was taken, but no one saw anything suspicious. No strange vehicles. No unknown adults approaching children. Alfred Beilhartz simply disappeared. His case remains unsolved. It has been over 80 years. His file, if it still exists, has never been released. Let me talk about clusters. One of the most disturbing patterns in wilderness disappearances is geographic clustering. Certain areas seem to have disproportionately high rates of disappearance. The Great Smoky Mountains is one such cluster. Dennis Martin, Trenny Gibson, Thelma Melton, multiple other cases spanning decades. Yosemite is another. Stacy Arras, Timothy Barnes, Warren Hatch, dozens of cases over the years. Crater Lake National Park in Oregon, multiple disappearances in a relatively small area. The Mount Shasta region in Northern California, a long history of strange disappearances. Why these specific areas? Some explanations are obvious. These are popular parks with high visitor numbers. More visitors means more opportunities for things to go wrong. But visitor numbers do not explain everything. Some parks with very high visitor numbers have relatively few disappearances. Light changes in the afternoon. Shadows lengthen. Landmarks look different. Navigation becomes harder. These explanations make sense. They probably account for many cases, but they do not explain everything. They do not explain why an experienced ranger who has spent 28 years in the backcountry would make a fatal mistake in the afternoon, but not in the morning. They do not explain why a teenager would vanish from a busy trail at 2:50 in the afternoon, but not at 10 in the morning. They do not explain the concentration. If fatigue and weather were the only factors, you would expect a gradual increase in disappearances throughout the day. Instead, you see a sharp spike in late afternoon. Something happens in late afternoon. We do not know what. Let me talk about the role of water. Another pattern that appears across multiple analyses is proximity to water. A disproportionate number of disappearances occur near lakes, rivers, streams, and other water features. Again, there are common-sense explanations. Water is dangerous. People drown. Bodies are carried away by currents. Water makes searches difficult. And drowning is indeed a leading cause of death in national parks. More people die from drowning than from any other single cause. But drowning does not explain every water-related disappearance. It does not explain cases where massive searches of water bodies find nothing. It does not explain cases where bodies are eventually found far from water, despite disappearing near water. It does not explain cases where scent trails lead toward water and then vanish completely. Dogs lose scent at water. That makes sense. Scent dissipates in water. But in some cases, the scent does not continue on the other side of the water. It just stops, as if the person entered the water and never came out, but also never drowned, because no body is found. Where do they go? Let me talk about what happens to search dogs in the middle of a clearing, in places where there is no reason for scent to stop. What do the dogs sense that we do not? Animals perceive things humans cannot. They hear frequencies we cannot hear. They smell things we cannot smell. They may sense electromagnetic fields or other phenomena we do not even have words for. When a highly trained search dog refuses to proceed, that dog is responding to something. We just do not know what. Let me talk about what happens after a case is closed. When a missing person case is officially closed, several things happen. First, active searching stops. Resources are redirected. The case moves from active to cold. Second, media attention fades. Other stories take precedence. The missing person's name disappears from headlines. Third, documentation stops. New information is rarely added to the file. The case becomes static. Fourth, and most troubling, the retention schedule starts ticking. After 7 to 10 years, depending on the specific schedule, the file can be destroyed. Not sealed, not archived, destroyed. The paper shredded, the digital files deleted, the evidence eliminated. For families, this is devastating. The file contains everything that was ever learned about their loved one's disappearance. The search records, the witness statements, the analysis. Once it is destroyed, it is gone forever. There is no appeal. There is no exception for unsolved cases. There is no consideration of whether the family might someday want to see the file. The bureaucracy grinds on. The schedule is followed. The file is destroyed. And with it, any chance of future resolution. Let me talk about what families experience. They contact media. They connect with other families. They refuse to accept the silence. For those families, I have nothing but admiration. The system is designed to break them. And yet, they persist. Let me talk about what this investigation has cost me. 6 months of work, thousands of hours, hundreds of documents read, dozens of people interviewed. I have received hate mail, people who think I am sensationalizing, people who think I am giving credence to nonsense, people who think I am disrespecting the Park Service. I have received threats, anonymous messages suggesting I should stop asking questions. I cannot say whether these are serious or just trolling, but they are unsettling. I have spent money. FOIA fees, travel costs, research materials, more than I care to calculate, and I have experienced the same frustration that families experience. The stonewalling, the non-responses, the endless runaround. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the obstacles seemed insurmountable, when I wondered if any of this mattered. I kept going because I believe it matters. The missing deserve to be remembered. The families deserve answers. The public deserves to know. And the silence deserves to be broken. Let me issue a challenge. To the National Park Service, release the data. Create the database. Make it public. Let researchers analyze it. Let families access it. Stop hiding behind fees and exemptions and classifications. If there is nothing to hide, prove it. If the patterns I have described do not exist, show us the data that disproves them. If the system is working, demonstrate it. Because right now, the opacity looks like guilt. The secrecy looks like cover-up. The silence looks like admission. You may have legitimate reasons for everything you have done. If so, explain them. Publicly. Completely. Without hedging. The American public pays for these parks. The American public visits these parks. The American public disappears from these parks. We deserve to know the truth. To the families of the missing. Do not give up. I know the system is exhausting. I know the obstacles seem impossible. I know the silence is maddening. But you are not alone. There are others who share your experience. There are researchers who care about your cases. There are journalists who want to tell your stories. Connect with each other. Support each other. Fight together. The system is designed to isolate you, to make you feel alone, to convince you that your case is unique, your struggle is individual, your questions are unreasonable. That is not true. Your questions are reasonable. Your struggle is shared. Your case is part of a pattern, and patterns can be exposed. To the researchers and journalists who will continue this work, be rigorous. Document everything. Verify everything. Do not speculate beyond what the evidence supports. The critics are watching. They will seize on any error, any overreach, any unsupported claim. Do not give them ammunition. Stick to the facts. The facts are disturbing enough. The database does not exist. That is a fact. Files are destroyed. That is a fact. FOIA requests are denied or priced beyond reach. That is a fact. Patterns exist that have not been explained. That is a fact. These facts do not require supernatural explanations. They do not require conspiracy theories. They stand on their own. Present them clearly. Present them accurately. Let the public draw their own conclusions and keep digging, because the truth is out there, and it deserves to be found. This was Echo 7, the database that does not exist. I will continue this investigation. If you have information, contact me. If you want to help, reach out. Together, maybe we can find the answers that have been hidden for so long. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious. Let me tell you about a case that did not make the official records at all. A viewer contacted me after seeing my preliminary research posts. He told me about his uncle. I will not use real names to protect the family's privacy. His uncle disappeared in Olympic National Park in 1987. He was an experienced hiker. He had hiked that specific trail multiple times. He went out for a day hike and never returned. The family reported him missing. A search was conducted. Nothing was found. Standard story so far. But here is where it gets strange. Years later, the family tried to obtain records about the search. They filed FOIA requests. They were told no records existed. Not that records were classified. Not that records could not be released. That records did not exist. No incident report. No search log. No documentation of any kind. As if the disappearance never happened. The family had newspaper clippings from the time. They had receipts showing the uncle had been in the area. They had testimony from rangers who remembered participating in the search. But officially, according to Park Service records, nothing happened. How is that possible? Either the records were destroyed, or they were never created, or they were removed from the system deliberately. None of those options is acceptable. This is not an isolated case. Multiple families have reported similar experiences. Their loved ones disappeared. Searches were conducted. But no official record exists. The bureaucracy that should document these events simply does not. Let me talk about what I believe is happening here. I do not believe there is a single conspiracy. I do not believe there is a secret room somewhere where officials decide which disappearances to hide. What I believe is worse, in some ways. I believe there is a culture of institutional indifference. A culture that treats missing persons as problems to be managed rather than tragedies to be solved. A culture that prioritizes liability protection over truth. A culture that has learned over decades that silence is easier than answers. This culture does not require conspiracy. It does not require coordination. It simply requires that everyone in the system follow the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is to not ask questions, to not dig deeper, to accept the official explanation, to close the file, to move on. The path of least resistance is to deny FOIA requests, to quote high fees, to claim ongoing investigation, to wait out the families until they give up. The path of least resistance is to let retention schedules destroy old files, to not create new databases, to not analyze patterns, to not publish findings. Each individual decision seems reasonable in isolation. Each official is just doing their job, following procedure, protecting the agency. But the cumulative effect is a system that hides the truth, not through active conspiracy, through passive neglect. And passive neglect can be just as effective as active cover-up. Let me address the skeptics directly. Some will say I am seeing patterns where none exist, that these are random tragedies with mundane explanations, that falls and drownings and exposure account for everything. Maybe. But explain to me why the Park Service does not track these random tragedies. If they are truly random, if there are no patterns, then a database would prove that. Statistical analysis would show nothing unusual. The clusters would disappear. The temporal patterns would normalize. If there is nothing to hide, the system collapses. Fourth, there would need to be legal action, families suing for records, advocacy groups filing lawsuits, courts compelling disclosure. The legal system can force transparency that agencies resist voluntarily. Fifth, there would need to be sustained attention. Not just a news cycle, not just a viral moment. Years of consistent investigation, building a body of evidence that cannot be dismissed. This is what I am trying to contribute to. One investigation among many that will eventually reveal the truth. Let me be honest about the limitations of this investigation. I am one person. I have limited resources. I have limited access. I have limited legal standing. I can file FOIA requests. I can interview willing sources. I can analyze public data. I can connect patterns. But I cannot force agencies to cooperate. I cannot compel testimony. I cannot access classified files. What I have presented here is incomplete. It raises questions I cannot answer. It suggests patterns I cannot fully demonstrate. This is not the final word. This is an opening statement. Others will need to continue this work. Others with more resources, more access, more legal power. I hope this investigation provides a foundation, a starting point, a map of the territory that needs to be explored. The database that does not exist should exist. Creating it will take more than I can do alone. Let me end with a thought about why this matters. Some will say this is morbid. Why focus on tragedy? Why dwell on the missing? Why not celebrate the millions who visit parks safely? Those millions matter too, and their safety depends on understanding what goes wrong. If certain areas are dangerous, they should be identified. If certain conditions correlate with disappearance, they should be studied. If certain protocols are inadequate, they should be improved. This is not morbid curiosity. This is public safety. The families of the missing are not asking for conspiracy theories. They are asking for basic competence. Document what happened. Track the cases. Analyze the patterns. Share the findings. Is that too much to ask? Apparently, for the National Park Service, it is. And that is the real scandal here. Not what might be happening in the wilderness, but what is definitely happening in the bureaucracy. The failure to count, the failure to track, the failure to analyze, the failure to share. These failures are documented. They are undeniable. They are ongoing. And until they are addressed, people will keep disappearing, and families will keep being denied answers. And the wilderness will keep its secrets. This was Echo 7, the database that does not exist. Thank you for your attention. If you have information relevant to this investigation, contact me. If you want to support this work, share it. If you want to help, ask questions. File FOIA requests. Contact your representatives. Join the effort. The silence can be broken, but only if enough of us refuse to accept it. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there. I cannot prove that something supernatural is happening in American national parks. I cannot prove that NPS is consciously hiding evidence of some unknown phenomenon. I cannot prove that other agencies are involved in a cover-up, but I can prove the following. NPS consciously decided not to create a centralized missing persons database. FOIA requests about disappearances are systematically denied or made prohibitively expensive. Case files are destroyed according to retention schedules even when cases remain unsolved. Internal documents indicate the existence of special protocols for anomalous cases. Former and current employees describe consistent patterns. Premature search terminations. Interagency involvement. Unexplained phenomena. Statistical analysis shows patterns in disappearances that are not explained by standard accident scenarios. Bodies are found in previously searched locations years later, and the agency refuses to answer questions about this. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented reality. People disappear in American national parks. The government does not count how many. The government does not want us to know how many. And when you start asking questions, you encounter a wall of silence. What am I actually alleging? I am not claiming that the National Park Service is abducting people. I am not claiming that monsters or aliens or supernatural forces are responsible for wilderness disappearances. I am not endorsing any specific theory about what happens to the missing. I am claiming that the National Park Service has systematically failed to document, track, and investigate wilderness disappearances. I am claiming that this failure serves institutional interests by obscuring the scale and nature of the problem. I am claiming that families of the missing have been denied information they deserve and answers they need. I am claiming that the destruction of case files, the sealing of documents, the astronomical FOIA fees, and the refusal to maintain centralized data are not bureaucratic accidents. They are choices. Whether those choices reflect negligence, liability concerns, or something more sinister, I cannot say with certainty, but I can say that the current system is unacceptable. Here is what I believe should happen. First, Congress should mandate that the National Park Service create and maintain a publicly accessible database of missing persons. Every case should be logged with basic details: date, location, circumstances, outcome. This database should be permanent. It should not be subject to retention schedules that allow for destruction. Second, FOIA exemptions should not apply to missing persons cases after a reasonable period. If a case has been closed or suspended for 5 years or more, the file should be presumptively public. Families should not have to fight for decades to see records about their own relatives. Third, independent oversight should be established for search and rescue operations. When official searches fail to find someone, I end it with more questions than answers. What happened to Dennis Martin, to Stacy Arras, to Trenny Gibson, to Paul Fugate, to the thousands whose names we do not know because their files were destroyed or their cases were never properly logged? I do not know, but I know that the National Park Service could provide answers, or at least better information, if they chose to. They have chosen not to, and that choice itself is a kind of answer. The wilderness is not safe. We know this. We accept the risk when we enter it, but we expect that if something happens to us, someone will look for us. Someone will document what occurred. Someone will try to understand. For too many people, that expectation has been betrayed. The search was inadequate. The documentation was insufficient. The investigation was abandoned. The file was destroyed. And the families were left with nothing but questions and silence. If you have a relative who disappeared in a national park or forest, here is what you can do. First, file FOIA requests. File them with the National Park Service. File them with the FBI if they were involved. File them with the local sheriff's office. File them with every agency that may have had involvement in the case. Be persistent. Appeal denials. Document everything. Do not accept the first refusal as a final answer. The FOIA law is on your side. The burden of proof for classification lies with the agency, not with you. If you are denied, demand specific indication of exemptions. If exemptions seem improper, letter. Every meeting, record dates, names, content of conversations. Keep a journal. Save copies of all correspondence. Record phone conversations if it is legal in your state. This documentation may be needed later, for litigation, for media, for future researchers. Fifth, consider going public. Media can create pressure that is impossible to create otherwise. Your relative's story deserves to be told. Local news is often interested in human interest stories. Podcasts about true crime and missing persons reach large audiences. Documentary filmmakers are looking for compelling cases. Publicity has risks, but it also has power. Agencies that ignore private requests sometimes respond when media attention appears. If you are a researcher or journalist, here is what you can do. Help build independent databases that the government refuses to create. The Citizen-created database is one such resource. The Charlie Project documents missing persons cases. The Doe Network works with unidentified remains. Every case you document is a case that cannot be erased. File your own FOIA requests. Every request creates a paper trail. Every denial can be appealed. Every appeal creates precedent and costs the agency time and resources. Aggregate requests have special value. When multiple researchers request similar information, it demonstrates public interest and makes denial harder to justify. Analyze data that is already available. IMAR's dashboards, however incomplete, contain information. Search and rescue reports contain information. Cold case profiles contain information. News archives contain information. Patterns exist. They are just waiting for someone to find them. Data scientists can apply statistical methods to available information. Geographic analysis can reveal clusters. Temporal analysis can reveal patterns in timing. Demographic analysis can reveal who is most at risk. Publish your findings. Make them available. Create the body of research that should exist, but does not. If you work or have worked for the National Park Service, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, or related agencies, here is what you can do. If you see something wrong, document it. Keep copies. Know the whistleblower protections that exist for federal employees. If you are ready to talk, there are people ready to listen. Journalists, researchers, congressional investigators. This can be done anonymously. This can be done with protection. The system will not change from within unless people inside the system are willing to speak up. If you are simply a citizen who visits national parks, here is what you can know and do. These places are beautiful. They are also dangerous in ways that are not always obvious and that you are not always warned about. Never go alone into the wilderness. If you must go alone, tell multiple people exactly where you are going, what route you plan to take, and when you plan to return. Give them instructions on when to start worrying. Carry a GPS beacon with emergency activation capability, not one that you have to press to work. One that transmits continuously and has an SOS button. Know that cell phone coverage does not exist in most wilderness areas. Plan accordingly. Register at trailheads where possible. Leave information in your vehicle about your planned route and expected return. Wear bright clothing that is easy to spot from the air. Carry a whistle. Carry a mirror for signaling. And know that if something happens, the system may fail you. Searches may be terminated earlier than you expect. Documentation may be inadequate. Your family may encounter walls of silence. This should not stop you from enjoying the wilderness, but it should inform your preparations. And remember the names of those who did not return. Dennis Lloyd Martin, 6 years old, Great Smoky Mountains, June 14, 1969. He was last seen hiding behind bushes to play a joke on the adults. Stacy Ann Arras, 14 years old, Yosemite, July 17, 1981. She wanted to photograph the lake. Teresa Lynn Gibson, 16 years old, Great Smoky Mountains, October 8, 1976. She was hurrying to get back to the bus. Paul Braxton Fugate, 41 years old, Chiricahua National Monument, January 13, 1980. He went out to check the nature trail. Randy Morganson, 54 years old, Sequoia and Kings Canyon, July 21, 1996. For 28 years, he was a ranger. Dale Stehling, 51 years old, Mesa Verde, June 9, 2013. He went to the Spruce Tree House. The trail was a quarter mile. Thelma Pauline Melton, 58 years old. Great Smoky Mountains, September 25, 1981. She was walking slightly faster than her friends. Joseph Keller, 19 years old. Rio Grande National Forest, July 23, 2015. He went for a jog. Jacob Gray, 22 years old. Olympic National Park, October 2017. He was traveling across the country by bicycle. Warren Hatch, 20 years old. Yosemite, 1972. He went on a solo backpacking trip, and thousands of others whose names we do not know because the files were destroyed or never created, whose stories were never told, whose families are still waiting for answers that will never come. They deserved better. We all deserve better. The National Park Service claims they do not maintain a centralized database of missing persons. They say this as if it is an explanation. In reality, it is an admission that they do not want to know how many people have disappeared, an admission that they do not want us to know, an admission that where there should be accountability, there is only silence. 1,400 searchers looked for Dennis Martin, 60 Green Berets, helicopters, FBI, and they found nothing. Either a boy in a red shirt dissolved into thin air, or someone knows more than they are telling. The database that does not exist should exist. The records that were destroyed should have been preserved. The questions that remain unanswered should have answers. Maybe someday they will. Until then, the wilderness keeps its secrets, and the silence continues. I want to leave you with one final thought. Every year, 300 million people visit American national parks. They come to see beauty. They come to experience nature. They come to escape the noise and stress of modern life. Most of them return home safely. They take photographs. They make memories. They tell stories about sunsets and wildlife and mountain views. But some do not return. Some walk into the wilderness and vanish. For most of human history, this was accepted. The wild was dangerous. People died. Nature was indifferent. But we no longer live in that world. We have helicopters. We have thermal imaging. We have GPS beacons. We have trained search dogs. We have volunteer networks spanning continents. We have the technology and the resources to find the missing, or at least to document the search, to track the patterns, to analyze the data, to learn from each tragedy so that future tragedies might be prevented. We have all of this, and yet people still vanish without explanation, and the agency responsible still refuses to count them. This is not inevitable. This is a choice. It is a choice that can be changed. It will be changed, because families will not stop asking, because researchers will not stop investigating, because journalists will not stop reporting, because the American public will not accept silence forever. The database that does not exist will exist. The records that were destroyed will be recreated from surviving sources. The questions that remain unanswered will find answers. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Because truth has a way of emerging. No matter how deeply it is buried, no matter how long it is hidden, no matter how many obstacles are placed in its path, truth emerges. And when it does, we will finally know what happened to Dennis Martin and Stacy Arras and Trenny Gibson and all the others. We will finally know what the wilderness has been hiding. We will finally know what the silence concealed. Until that day, I will keep investigating. I will keep asking questions. I will keep demanding answers. And I will keep telling these stories because they deserve to be told, because the missing deserve to be remembered, because the families deserve to be heard, and because the truth, whatever it is, deserves to be known. This was Echo 7, the database that does not exist. If you have information about a wilderness disappearance, if you have experienced the system I described, if you have documentation that should be public, contact me. Link in the description. I will protect sources. I will independently verify all information before publication. I will not publish anything I cannot substantiate, but I will continue asking questions, because someone has to. See you in the next investigation.